The clock struck midnight when a heavy knock reverberated through Brian's dimly lit apartment. He glanced at the door, a wave of apprehension washing over him. A late-night visitor was never good news, especially for a man who had taken to isolating himself in the aftermath of his sister's departure. As he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. There stood Faith, the company's top secretary, her usually polished appearance marred by a sheen of sweat and a look of desperation etched across her features. "Brian," she said, her voice trembling, "I need your help." He ushered her in, the door clicking shut behind them, sealing them away from the world. Faith was a striking woman, intelligent and graceful, her beauty often masked by an air of mystery. She had always maintained a professional distance at work, but tonight she appeared vulnerable, the facade stripped away. "What's going on?" he asked, his concern mingling with intrigue. Faith took a deep breath, glancing around as if the walls themselves could eavesdrop on her secrets. "I'm not just Faith," she revealed, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that startled him. "I'm Jenny, the underground MMA fighter." Brian's heart raced. He had followed Jenny's fights closely, drawn in by the sheer power and ferocity she exhibited in the ring. The revelation rocked him. "You," he said, incredulity spilling from his lips. "You're an MMA fighter?" "Listen, please." Faith interrupted, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. "I was attacked after my last match. Some of the fighters are not happy about my success, and I need someone I can trust to cover for me. I need you to act like my brother." The words tumbled over one another in his mind, and Brian felt an unsettling mix of excitement and dread. Could he really step into this chaotic world? "Why me?" he asked, trying to grasp the gravity of the situation. "Because," she replied, her eyes glistening, "you're the only one I trust. You've helped me more than you know, just by being a friend. I need your help to navigate this." With the tension mounting, Brian weighed the implications of her request. He had watched his sister flourish in MMA, gaining strength and independence, and he had admired Jenny from a distance, rooting for her in the shadows. Now he faced a choice: to step into a world he barely understood or turn away from a woman who seemed to need him more than ever. As he processed this, the unrelenting ticking of the clock filled the silence, echoing the urgency of their situation. "Okay," he finally said, his voice steady, "I'll help you." The following day, the sun rose on an uncertain horizon. Brian found himself at a gym he had never visited before, one hidden in an unmarked warehouse on the outskirts of town. Faith, now Jenny, had arranged for them to meet her trainer, Mark, a grizzled veteran of the fight circuit. The gym was filled with an electric energy, the sound of fists hitting bags and muffled shouts echoing through the air. Mark was a mountain of a man, his presence intimidating yet strangely magnetic. He welcomed Brian with a firm handshake that spoke volumes. "You're here to support Jenny?" he asked, studying Brian with a scrutinizing gaze. "Yeah, I guess you could say that," Brian replied, unsure of how to fit into this world. He felt like a fish out of water, surrounded by tough women who wore their scars like badges of honor. "Good. She needs all the support she can get. There are a lot of eyes on her right now," Mark stated, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Brian nodded, feeling a newfound responsibility weighing on his shoulders. He observed Faith as she prepared for training, her demeanor shifting into that of a fierce warrior. She donned her gloves, transforming from the composed secretary he knew into an embodiment of raw power and determination. It was mesmerizing, and he felt an unexpected rush of pride swell within him. As the session progressed, Brian learned about the unyielding nature of the underground MMA scene, how victories and defeats were intertwined with personal stories, rivalries, and hidden agendas. Each punch thrown was a step closer to survival, and each fighter carried their burdens within the ring. During a break, Brian approached Faith, watching as sweat dripped from her brow, a fierce look of concentration on her face. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. "What if they come after you again?" She wiped her forehead and looked him squarely in the eyes. "I faced worse than this. Fighting is my outlet. I won't back down now, not when I've come this far." The fire in her gaze ignited something within him, a sense of purpose he had long forgotten. "All right, I'm in this with you," he said, a newfound resolve echoing in his voice. As the session continued, the realization hit him. He wasn't just supporting her, he was embarking on a journey that would challenge his own understanding of strength, vulnerability, and identity. The following weeks were a whirlwind of training, late nights, and unspoken fears. As Brian delved deeper into the underground world, he encountered the darker sides of fighting jealousy, betrayal, and ambition coiling like a snake waiting to strike. Faith's presence in this brutal arena attracted both admiration and hostility, igniting rivalries that could turn deadly. One evening, as they sat in Brian's apartment reviewing strategies and fight footage, Faith's phone buzzed incessantly. She frowned as she glanced at the screen, then tossed it aside, her frustration palpable. "It's just my manager," she muttered, always trying to control the narrative. "Maybe you should talk to him," Brian suggested, trying to lighten the mood. "I mean, it could help with the pressure you're feeling." Faith shook her head vehemently. "You don't understand. He has his own agenda. I'm just a pawn in his game. I need to do this my way." But Brian could sense a storm brewing beneath her bravado, and he wished she would confide in him more. Just then, the doorbell rang, jarring them both. Brian glanced at Faith, and the apprehension in her eyes sent a chill down his spine. "Stay here," he said, moving toward the door cautiously. As he opened it, he was met by a tall, imposing figure dressed in a leather jacket. "I'm looking for Jenny," the man said, his voice low and menacing. Brian's instinct kicked in, and he stepped in front of the door. "Who wants to know?" The man smirked, unfazed by the interruption. "I'm just a friend of hers. You're in over your head, buddy. This isn't a game." Before Brian could respond, Faith appeared behind him, her expression unreadable. "It's okay, Brian," she said softly, stepping forward. "He's with the circuit." The man eyed her critically before nodding. "You're making waves, Jenny. You need to watch your back." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving a palpable tension hanging in the air. As the door closed, Faith's demeanor shifted, the bravado faded, revealing vulnerability that gripped Brian's heart. "What was that about?" he pressed, concern etched in his features. "Just someone trying to scare me," she replied, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "They don't want me to succeed." In that moment, Brian realized that the stakes were higher than he had imagined. Their lives were intertwined in a world where trust was scarce and danger lurked in every corner. The truth was a labyrinth, and he was determined to navigate it with Faith by his side. Weeks passed, and the underground scene grew ever more intense. Faith, now fully embracing her identity as Jenny, became a fierce contender, winning fights that garnered both admiration and envy. But with every victory came whispers of a rival, a fighter named Raven who had a reputation for ruthlessness. During a training session, Brian overheard Mark discussing Raven's tactics, the man's voice laden with respect and fear. "She'll do anything to win. If she feels threatened by Jenny, there's no telling what she'll do." Brian's heart sank. "What do you mean?" he asked, concern etched across his brow. "She's been known to play dirty," Mark replied, his gaze grave. "If she wants to take Jenny down, she'll find a way. We need to keep a close eye on her." That evening, Brian confronted Faith, trying to express his worries. "I think Raven's a serious threat. You need to be careful." She dismissed his concerns with a wave of her hand, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I can handle myself, Brian. I've fought tougher opponents. I won't let fear dictate my life." The tension between them thickened as Brian grappled with the helplessness of watching someone he cared for embrace danger so readily. They continued training, but unease settled over Brian like a dark cloud. He knew the ring was a battleground, but it was the unseen threats that truly haunted him. One fateful night, Brian and Faith were wrapping up after an exhausting session when they heard a commotion outside the gym. They exchanged worried glances, and instinctively, Brian stepped toward the exit. As they emerged into the night, the scene before them made his blood run cold. A group of women surrounded Raven, their laughter sinister as they shoved her against a wall. Brian's protective instincts flared, and he surged forward, pulling Faith along with him. "Hey, leave her alone," he shouted, the sound echoing into the night. Raven turned, her expression one of shock before morphing into a smirk. "Look who decided to play hero," she taunted. "You're going to regret this." As the confrontation escalated, Brian felt a surge of adrenaline. He would not let Faith or Raven be a victim of intimidation. But as he approached, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Mark, stepping between them, his presence a calming force. "Enough," he commanded, his voice booming. "This isn't the time or place." The tension hung heavy in the air as Brian and Faith stood beside Mark, the unease palpable. Raven backed down, her eyes narrowing in disdain. "This isn't over," she warned before slinking away with her entourage. Afterward, as they walked back to their car, Faith leaned into Brian, the fear of the moment surfacing in her expression. "Thank you," she whispered, gratitude evident in her voice. Brian felt a wave of determination surge through him. He would not let her fight this battle alone. Together, they would face whatever challenges awaited them. The following week saw Brian and Faith diving deeper into their roles. Brian took on the mantle of Faith's manager, learning the ins and outs of the fighting circuit, while juggling his demanding job at the office. Their partnership flourished amidst the chaos, as each victory in the ring strengthened their bond outside it. However, a dark cloud loomed as Raven's threats became more apparent. Rumors swirled about her connections to shady figures in the underground scene, and Brian felt an urgent need to dig deeper into this world of secrets. Late one night, after an exhausting training session, he sat at his computer, researching everything he could about Raven and her past. Hours passed, and as dawn broke, Brian's eyes widened at what he uncovered. Raven had a history of not just fighting dirty, but of manipulating her opponents. A chilling realization washed over him: she was as dangerous outside the ring as she was inside it. The next day, Brian shared his findings with Faith. "We need to be cautious. Raven has a pattern of targeting her rivals, and you're at the top of her list." Faith listened, the fire in her eyes dimming slightly. "I can't let fear dictate my decisions." "I'm not backing down," she asserted, but the tremor in her voice revealed her internal struggle. As they prepared for Faith's next fight, Brian felt the weight of their circumstances crushing down. He wanted to protect her, but he also understood that this was her fight to win. They trained hard, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken fears and the weight of impending danger. On the night of the fight, the venue was packed, the air electric with anticipation. Brian's heart raced as he watched Faith step into the ring, her focus unwavering. As the bell rang, the crowd erupted, but all he could hear was the roar of his own pulse. The match unfolded before him, but a sickening sensation gripped him as he noticed Raven lurking at the edge of the crowd, a shadowy figure seemingly ready to pounce. The fight progressed, and Brian's heart sank further as he witnessed Faith taking hits, but she stood tall, refusing to back down. As the rounds wore on, he knew he had to act. He slipped away from the sidelines, scanning the crowd for Raven, determined to keep her from interfering. When he spotted her, a cold dread washed over him. She was poised and watching, a predatory glint in her eyes. Brian approached her, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and anger. "What do you want with her?" he demanded, his voice low but firm. Raven turned slowly, a smirk dancing on her lips. "What's it to you?" "Just watching my competition," she replied with feigned innocence. "You're not just a spectator," Brian shot back, anger boiling beneath the surface. "You're looking for a way to destroy her. You need to leave her alone." The tension between them crackled like static in the air, and as Raven stepped closer, her expression darkened. "You don't know who you're messing with, pretty boy. Back off, or you might find yourself in the ring next." Just then, a deafening cheer erupted from the crowd as Faith landed a powerful blow, sending her opponent reeling. The moment shattered the tension, and Raven's eyes flickered with annoyance. "This isn't over," she hissed before slinking away, leaving Brian shaken but resolute. After a grueling fight, Faith emerged victorious, her body bruised but her spirit unbroken. The crowd roared in approval, but as she celebrated, Brian couldn't shake the feeling of foreboding that lingered in the air. Raven's threat still hung heavily over them. As the adrenaline faded, Brian and Faith basked in the afterglow of victory, yet Brian's mind raced with the dangers they still faced. "You did amazing," he praised, but he saw the shadow of doubt flickering in her eyes. "Yeah, but at what cost?" she murmured, her smile faltering. "Raven's not going to give up easily. I feel like I'm being hunted." In the days that followed, their lives took a darker turn. Strange occurrences began haunting them, threatening messages slipped under Faith's office door, her car vandalized, and shadows lurking outside her apartment. Each incident heightened Brian's anxiety, pushing him to take action. Determined to protect Faith, he took matters into his own hands. He contacted a private investigator to dig deeper into Raven's connections, hoping to uncover her secrets and shield Faith from the impending danger. The investigation revealed disturbing truths. Raven was linked to a crime syndicate that thrived on fear and intimidation, and she would stop at nothing to eliminate her competition. One evening, after a particularly unsettling day, Brian confronted Faith with the findings. "We need to make a plan. This isn't just about fighting anymore. It's about your safety." Faith nodded, but there was a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I'm not running away, Brian. I've come too far to let her dictate my life. I need to confront this head-on. The tension crackled between them, and Brian's protective instincts surged. You can't fight this alone. We need to work together. Then we do it my way, she replied firmly. I won't be a victim. I'll face her in the ring. If she wants to take me down, I'll give her everything I've got. Brian felt a mix of admiration and fear for her resolve. He knew the risks but understood her need to assert her power. They strategized, preparing for the inevitable showdown, both physical and psychological. The night of the rematch arrived, and the atmosphere in the underground venue was charged with anticipation. Brian stood in the crowd, his heart pounding as he watched Faith enter the ring. She was a warrior, her focus unwavering, and he felt a swell of pride that coursed through him. As the match began, Raven was ruthless, her every move calculated and vicious. But Faith held her ground, countering every strike with determination. The crowd roared, the stakes higher than ever as the two women exchanged blows, embodying the very essence of the battle they were fighting. But as the match progressed, Brian's instincts screamed that something was off. He glanced toward the shadows of the venue, his heart racing as he spotted figures lingering at the edges, watching intently. Suddenly, Raven lunged at Faith, her tactics becoming increasingly dangerous. Brian couldn't stand idly by. He forced his way closer to the ring, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Faith, watch out, he shouted, fear gripping his heart. In that moment of distraction, Raven struck hard, sending Faith crashing to the mat. Brian's heart plummeted as the crowd gasped. But Faith, ever resilient, pushed herself back to her feet, a fire igniting in her eyes. As the fight continued, Brian could sense the undercurrents of danger swirling around them. He made eye contact with Mark, who nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had to be ready for anything. Just then, chaos erupted as a group of men stormed the ring members of the crime syndicate, intent on ensuring Raven's victory by any means necessary. Brian felt a rush of anger and adrenaline surge within him. This was no longer just a fight for titles, it was a fight for survival. With instinct driving him, Brian leapt into action. He reached the edge of the ring, shouting for security as the crowd erupted into panic. "Get her out of here!" he yelled, his voice strained. As the chaos unfolded, Faith remained focused, delivering a fierce kick to Raven that sent her staggering back. But the men approached with malicious intent, and Brian felt an urgency to protect her. "Get out of the ring!" he shouted, desperate to shield her from the impending danger. In a split second, Brian jumped into the ring, adrenaline surging through him. "Faith, we have to go," he urged, grabbing her hand. Raven sneered, seizing the moment of chaos to attack once more. "You think you can save her?" she spat, fury etched on her face. As Brian and Faith prepared to fight back, Mark rushed in, a wall of strength against the encroaching danger. "Everyone back," he commanded, standing protectively in front of them. "This fight is over." With the crowd in a frenzy, security finally intervened, ushering Brian and Faith out of the ring as chaos ensued. They fought their way through the turmoil, adrenaline propelling them toward the exit. In the aftermath of the chaos, Brian and Faith found themselves standing in the cool night air, their hearts racing from the adrenaline and fear. They had narrowly escaped the violence, but the reality of what had happened settled heavily on them. As they caught their breath, Faith turned to Brian, her expression a mix of relief and confusion. "What just happened? Are we safe?" "For now," Brian replied, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "But this isn't over. We need to report what happened. Raven and her crew won't stop until they get what they want." Faith nodded, her determination reigniting. "I won't back down, Brian. I refuse to be afraid." Together, they contacted the authorities, reporting the threats and the chaos that had unfolded. The police took their statements seriously, recognizing the patterns of intimidation surrounding the underground scene. As days turned into weeks, the investigation into Raven's connections unfolded. Law enforcement uncovered her ties to the crime syndicate, leading to a series of arrests that dismantled her influence. Faith's courage and resilience shone through, inspiring others in the underground community to stand against intimidation. Brian found himself reevaluating his own life. The experience had changed him, reknitting a sense of purpose he thought he'd lost. As he continued to support Faith, he found fulfillment in their partnership, one built on trust, respect, and shared battles. In the end, the journey had forged an unbreakable bond between them. They learned to navigate life's complexities together, embracing both the challenges and the triumphs. One evening, as they sat together on Faith's porch, the sun setting in vibrant hues, Brian took Faith's hand. I'm proud of you, he said sincerely. You faced your fears and emerged stronger. Faith smiled, the warmth of the moment enveloping them. I couldn't have done it without you, Brian. You've been my anchor. As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, they knew that the shadows of the past were behind them. Together, they would face whatever came next, ready to embrace the dawn of new beginnings, a journey filled with hope, trust, and a deeper understanding of their own strength. So if you love this story, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and comment below. Your interaction helps us grow,